Hi everyone. So I filmed the last video over the weekend and it was before we heard the news that we're not going back to school this year. So I wanted to say a little something about that before we begin the lesson. So I know a lot of you are really disappointed that we're not going back, and to be honest, I am too. I was really hoping we could just go back and get back to normal, and that didn't turn out that way. And I'm afraid we're just gonna have to make the best of it and muddle through, and hopefully we'll be okay. And to the seniors, I know you're extra disappointed because there are all the great end of the year activities that were in store for you. And I'm so sorry that you are missing out on that. And I've shared this with some people, but not all. I just want to say it here. I can relate a little bit. So when I was in my senior year, this was in 1987, so quite a long time ago, I came down with the chicken pox right before the end of the year. So I don't even know if anybody gets chicken pox anymore, but it's a highly contagious disease, and I was not able to go to school for the last 2 or 3 weeks of my senior year. So I missed out on all the activities, but the bad part is that all of my friends and my boyfriend at the time were still able to do all the activities. It was just me that couldn't be there. So I was highly disappointed then too. So I can kind of relate to what you're going through. I know it's not the same thing. It's not a worldwide pandemic, but I did miss out on my senior activities too. So just wanted to put that out there that I feel for you, and I'm sorry. Okay, so we're gonna get to today's lesson. So we're still dealing with sum and difference identities. So you'll see that they look the same at the top of the sheet that we had the other day. So we're gonna do a little bit more with them today. So it gives you some information on number 1, and it says we're gonna be looking for the exact value of sine x plus y. Okay, so the first thing you would want to do is look at the choices at the top of the page for the sum and difference identities, and you will find that it would be the first one. So I'm going to copy that over. So it's going to be the sine of x times the cosine of y plus the cosine of x times the sine of y. Okay, so we're going to use the information that we have to fill in the values. So we're not just told straight out what the values are. The only thing we know is that the sine of x is 4/5, so we could plug in 4/5 right here for sine of x. The other one we know is the cosine of y is negative 12/13. So I can put that one in to negative 12/13. But I don't know the other values to put over here for cosine of x or sine of y. So I'm going to need to do a little bit of work to get that done. So notice that at the very end of the problem, it says to draw reference triangles. So we have done this early in the year, and I want to remind you what that is. So a reference triangle means that you draw the coordinate plane, that's the x and y axis, and you're going to draw the triangles in one of the 4 quadrants. So notice it says that angle x is between 0 and pi over 2. So remember the unit circle, like 0 is here, pi over 2 is up here, pi is on the left, 3 pi over 2 at the bottom, and then 2 pi. So it's saying that the angle x is in between 0 and pi over 2. So 0 is here, pi over 2 is over here, so it means the angle is somewhere in quadrant 1. So you want to just draw an angle in quadrant 1. Anywhere is fine. That's going to be labeled x. And you're going to drop a perpendicular to the x-axis, and that forms a right triangle. And then you will fill in what you know. So we were told that the sine of x is 4/5. So keep in mind SOHCAHTOA. Sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So 4/5. That means that opposite from the x would put the 4 here, and hypotenuse would put the 5 here. So you need to know this value so that you can put the cosine of x over here in the formula. So you would need to do the Pythagorean Theorem. Remember, the Pythagorean Theorem is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So we don't know x, that would be here on the x-axis, but we do know that y is 4, so that's 4 squared. and we know that the hypotenuse, or r, is 5 squared. So we're going to do the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so keep x squared the same. 4 squared would be 16. 5 squared is 25. You would need to subtract the 16 over. So 25 minus 16 is 9. To eliminate the square, you would do the square root of both sides. And you learned in algebra when you square root both sides to include plus or minus. So then the square root of 9 is 3. So what does that mean in our drawing? We need to remember that we're in the first quadrant, and the value we're looking for is going to the right of the x-axis. So going to the right means it's a positive. So that means that this value right here would be a positive 3. So it could have been a negative value had it been in another quadrant, but because it's quadrant 1, it must be positive. Okay, so the reason why we needed to know that is because in the very next part of the formula or identity that we're using, we need to know the cosine of x. So x is this angle over here in the first quadrant. So cosine, remember in SOHCAHTOA, is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent would be the 3 and the hypotenuse would be the 5. So that would be 3/5. Okay, and then we have to find the last value that we need, which is the sine of y. So notice in the problem, it says that the y angle is between pi over 2 and pi. So here's pi over 2 and here's pi. So that means the angle is in the second quadrant. So just draw any angle in the second quadrant, drop a perpendicular to the x-axis, and that will be angle y. So fill in what you were given. We were told that the cosine is negative 12/13. So cosine, remember, is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent would be here and the hypotenuse would be here, but notice there's a negative sign in front of the entire fraction. That means that one of the two is negative. And in this case, the 12 would be negative because you would be going to the left of the x-axis. So going to the left implies that 12 is negative. The 13 could not have been negative because that's the radius of a circle. So remember, there's a circle around this whole thing with the 13 being the radius. Okay, so that means it's a negative 12 here. Okay, so we're gonna need this piece over here in order to fill in our last value for the sine of y. So I'm going to need to do the Pythagorean theorem again, which is x squared plus y squared is r squared. So we know that the x is negative 12, so that will be negative 12 squared. We don't have y, so that will be y squared. And then we need 13 squared. And then we'll figure this out. So negative 12 squared would be 144. Keep the y squared the same. 13 squared would be 169. And then we will subtract the 144. So 169 minus 144 is 25. We'll take the square root of both sides. And whenever you take the square root, remember it's plus and minus. So it'd be plus or minus 5. Now you have to pick between the plus and the minus based on this triangle. So the value we're looking for is going up from the x-axis. So that implies that this 5 would have to be positive 5 in order for it to go up. So that should be a positive value. Now, if this had been in a different quadrant, perhaps the 5 could have been negative. So you have to look at the quadrant you're in and fill in what you need. Okay, so then you look at the final thing we need on our identity, and that's the sine of y. So this is the y, and in SOHCAHTOA, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that would be 5/13. Now, if we were in class, this would be something that I would ask you to do without a calculator because I want to prepare you for AP Calculus, when most of the time you can't use a calculator, but there's no way for me to monitor that here. So go ahead and use a calculator, but be prepared next year if you do AP not to use a calculator. So you can do the multiplication first. So multiply these two fractions. You're going to get a decimal, but your calculator has a way to change it to a fraction. You go to math and then choose fraction, and then it turns a decimal into a fraction. So when you figure this out, it turns out to be negative 48 over 65. Then you're going to keep the plus sign the same, because remember, we're always follow order of operations. And then we multiply these fractions. So again, you can use your calculator if you like, but be prepared not to next year. So if you multiply straight across, you would get 15 over 65. And then you combine the two fractions, so negative 48 plus 15 would be negative 33 over 65. So your final answer for number 1 is that value right there, negative 33 over 65. All right, so that completes number 1. If you need to catch up, please stop the video and come back when you're ready. Okay, so number 2 is a similar question. It asks us to give the tangent of x minus y. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is look at the identity that I need from the options at the top of the page. So the one that it matches would be the tangent of x minus the tangent of y all over 1 plus tangent of x times tangent of y. Okay, so part of it we know and part we don't, so you're going to need to draw a reference triangle again. So somewhere on your page, let's do that. So it first says that x is between 0 and pi over 2. So here's 0, here's pi over 2, so x is somewhere in between. So you're going to draw an angle in quadrant 1, drop a perpendicular to the x-axis, and that's angle x. Then it says the tangent is 15/8. So tangent in SOHCAHTOA is the opposite over the adjacent. So that would put the 15 here and the 8 here. So we are missing the hypotenuse of this triangle. So we would need to do the Pythagorean theorem. So in this case, we have 8 would be the x, 15 would be the y, and we don't know the r. So 8 squared would be 64, 15 squared would be 225, and we don't know r. So you would add 64 and 225, that would be 289. You would take the square root of both sides. And remember, anytime you do the square root, it is plus and minus. And then the square root of 289 works out to be 17. Okay, now remember, this is the radius of a circle. Picture a circle going all the way around. The radius of a circle has to be positive, so that's going to be a positive 17. So I needed that triangle in order to fill in some things here. So let's do the other triangle while we're at it. For the second triangle, it says that the angle y is between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi. So 3 pi over 2 is down here and 2 pi is over here. So that means that the angle is going to be in quadrant 4 this time. So let me erase the 8 and put it up here so it doesn't get in our way. Okay, so you're going to have an angle in quadrant 4. Drop a perpendicular to the x-axis, so it's going to be an upside down triangle. The y value will be the angle here at the origin. And what does it say? The cosine is 7/25. So remember, cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So that would put the 7 here, and it would put the 25 on the hypotenuse. So what we don't have is the y value over here. So we're going to need to do the Pythagorean theorem. So let's work on that. I know the x is 7, so that's 7 squared. I don't know what y is, so that would be y squared. And 25 would be the hypotenuse, or the r. So 7 squared is 49. 25 squared is 625. You would subtract over the 49. So 625 minus 49 works out to be 576. You would take the square root of both sides. And remember, always include plus or minus. And then if you were to do the square root of 576, your answer would be 24. Okay, so go back to the drawing. We want to see whether it should be positive 24 or negative 24. So we are in the fourth quadrant where we are trying to find this value going down from the x-axis. So going down implies that that will be a negative number. So that will be negative 24. Okay, so the drawing is made. We have all the things that we need to now fill in the formula. So the tangent of x was actually given to us in the problem. That's 15/8. The tangent of y is what we need next. So for y, opposite over adjacent is what we want. So that's negative 24/7. So it's a subtraction sign, 24/7, and it's negative. Then in the denominator, it's 1 plus, and those same two numbers. So it's 15/8, a multiplication sign, and then tangent of y, which again is negative 24/7. Okay, so again, I don't mind if you use a calculator, but just keep in mind you can't do that next year. So use it for now. I have no way of knowing if you did or not. But so in the numerator, when you have a subtraction sign and a negative, a double negative makes it a positive. So you would need to add 15/8 and 24/7. So if you put that into your calculator, you will get a decimal, but change the decimal to a fraction by going under math and choosing fraction. So if you were to do that, you would get 297 over 56. Okay, in the denominator, again, you can use a calculator if you like, I won't know. And if you were to put this entire thing in there, I'm gonna do it real quick. I wanna make sure I'm giving you the right answer. Hold on one second. You're gonna get a decimal, go to math and choose fraction. And yes, it's negative 38/7. Okay, so then you're left with this that you have to simplify. So you're dividing fractions. So you've been taught in previous years, when you divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So you would keep the first fraction the same and multiply by the reciprocal of the other one. So that would put the 7 on top and the 38 on the bottom. And it's customary to put the negative sign on the top or to the side of the fraction, not on the bottom. So I moved the negative to the top. Okay. So now you would multiply this fraction by this fraction, and if you use your calculator, fine. But remember, change it to a fraction at the end. So any decimal, change to a fraction. So you should get negative 297 over 304. So that would be the final answer for number 2. Okay, so that does it for today. We're done with this lesson. I hope everybody is doing okay. Please let me know if you need help with the assignment, and see you soon. Bye-bye.